The noon sun hammered down on Frost Hollow's main street like a blacksmith's forge, turning the packed earth into a furnace that baked the scent of dust and desperation into the very air. Heat waves shimmered off the wooden storefronts, creating mirages that made the entire town appear to waver, like something glimpsed through troubled water. In the center of that merciless thoroughfare, Rosalie Quinn knelt in the dirt with her wrists bound behind her back, fighting to keep her breathing steady as the world she had known crumbled around her. The chemise that had been clean and modest that morning now hung in deliberate tatters, torn to expose the shame they intended her to wear like a brand. Her scalp, freshly shorn with sheep shears wielded by cruel hands, gleamed pale and vulnerable in the afternoon glare. Streaks of lye and ash painted her bare arms where Thomas Barrett's sons had scrubbed her raw, their rough handling designed to humiliate as much as cleanse. The caustic mixture burned like liquid fire against her skin, but she bit her tongue rather than give them the satisfaction of hearing her cry out. The metallic taste of her own blood filled her mouth, a small defiance against the larger horror unfolding around her. Should have stayed in Philadelphia, bread baker. Luke Barrett spat into the dust near her knees. Should have married one of your own kind instead of bringing your curse west to poison decent folk. Behind him, his father Thomas rolled down his sleeves with the methodical satisfaction of a job well done. The Barrett patriarch was a man who understood the value of public spectacle, knew that breaking a person's spirit required witnesses as much as violence. His weathered face showed no emotion beyond the grim contentment of duty performed. Near the smithy's forge, iron glowed cherry red in the coals, while Deputy Harlan Pike worked the bellows with nervous energy. The branding iron bore the ranch's crude U mark, meant to shame her for life. It was meant to mark her permanently, ensuring that even if she survived this day, she would carry its shame for whatever life remained to her. Rosalie's wedding ring, a simple band of silver that Maddow Red Willow had pressed into her palm the morning they wed, caught the harsh light as her fingers worked against the ropes. The ring bore a small dent where she had accidentally struck it against her bakery counter in Philadelphia, back when her greatest worry had been whether the morning bread would rise properly in the humid summer air. A shadow fell across her face. Rosalie looked up to see a figure that seemed to have materialized from the heat shimmer itself. The Lakota warrior stood 6 feet from her, close enough that she could see the intricate beadwork on his buckskin shirt, catch the light, the way the eagle feathers wore weathered buckskin with beadwork. His ceremonial war bonnet, kept wrapped in his bundle, stirred slightly in the hot breeze. His face was angular and weathered, marked by lines that spoke of long watches under vast skies and hard decisions made in harder country. But it was his eyes that held her attention, dark as river stones and steady as bedrock. They met hers with a recognition that cut through her terror, like a blade through silk. There was no pity in that gaze, only understanding, as if he saw in her something he knew intimately from his own experience. "Stand if you can," he said, his voice carrying the low rumble of distant thunder. Each word was measured, deliberate, weighted with more authority than the simple syllables should have possessed. "You're coming with me." Thomas Barrett's hand dropped to the pistol at his hip with practiced ease. "Now hold on there, savage. This woman owes a debt to my family, and we aim to see it paid in full." The warrior, she remembered hearing someone call him Kitchie during the weeks before Maddow's death, did not acknowledge the threat with so much as a glance. Instead, he dropped to one knee beside her in the dust, close enough that she could smell the sage and leather scent of his clothes, close enough to see the small scars that mapped his hands like a record of survived battles. "The debt was never hers," he said, still looking directly at Rosalie. His voice carried absolute certainty, as if he were stating a law of nature rather than an opinion. "It belongs to men who profit from poisoned wells and call it justice. From the general store's shaded porch Dr. Ada Whitcomb emerged into the blazing street. She was a small woman, barely reaching 5 feet in height, but she carried herself with the unquestioned authority that came from being the only person within 50 miles who could set a bone or deliver a baby without killing the mother. Her medical bag hung from her shoulder like a badge of office. "She needs water and tending, not torture," Dr. Whitcomb declared, raising her palm toward the Barrett men. Her voice carried the crisp diction of Eastern medical schools tempered by years of frontier pragmatism. "Look at those lie burns. Infection will set in without proper treatment." Across the street, the schoolhouse doors slammed shut with deliberate force as Miss Liza Bell herded her students to safety. But Rosalie caught sight of movement at the window, and something small and metallic glinted as it fell from the sill to land in the dust near her knee. A penknife, its bone handle warm from the teacher's pocket. That was when Kitchi moved. He flowed from stillness to action. With the fluid grace of a striking snake, bending to scoop up the penknife and flicking it open in one continuous motion. The small blade parted Rosalie's bonds with barely a whisper of resistance, the ropes falling away as if they had been made of cobweb rather than hemp. "Now," he said, catching her elbow to help her rise. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Thomas Barrett roared something inarticulate, while Luke lunged forward, reaching for Rosalie with hands that had held her down during the brutal shaving. Kitchi intercepted him with economical violence, catching the younger man's wrist and slamming it against the hitching rail hard enough to crack bone and send the branding iron clattering harmlessly into the dust. Gunshots cracked from multiple directions as other men joined the fray, muzzle flashes bright in the afternoon glare. Kitchi vaulted the hitching rail and hauled Rosalie up behind him onto his bay horse in one fluid motion, the animal responding to pressure from his knees without need for rein or voice command. They exploded down the main street as buckshot peppered the buildings around them, splinters of wood flying like angry wasps through the superheated air. 6 months earlier, Rosalie Quinn had been the proprietor of a modest but prosperous bakery on Chestnut Street in Philadelphia. Her days began at 4 in the morning with the lighting of ovens and ended at dusk with the sweeping of flour from floors worn smooth by generations of bakers. She kept meticulous ledgers and flowing script, recording each transaction with the precision that had made her business one of the most reliable in the Irish Quarter. Marriage had been an abstract concept, then something that might happen eventually with Patrick Donnelly from the docks, or Michael O'Brien from the coal yard safe choices that would have led to predictable futures mapped out in familiar territory. Then Maddo Red Willow had walked into her shop on an October morning when frost painted patterns on the windows. He was part of a Lakota delegation in the city for treaty negotiations, and while his companions conducted business in marble halls, he had wandered the streets with the careful attention of a man cataloging wonders. He ordered 6 loaves of bread, paying with silver coins that caught the lamplight. When she asked if he needed them wrapped for travel, he had smiled a slow, genuine expression that transformed his angular features completely. "For my boarding house," he said, his English precise but careful. "The woman who runs it tries, but her bread tastes like sawdust mixed with regret." The comment surprised a laugh from her, and in that moment of shared humor, something shifted between them. He returned the next day and the day after, not always buying bread, but sometimes simply talking while she worked. He told her about rolling grasslands that stretched beyond horizons, about buffalo herds that moved like living storms across the prairie, about skies so vast and star-filled they made a person feel both infinitely small and part of something larger than imagination could contain. When he asked her to marry him, the proposal came not with flowery speeches, but with quiet intensity. "I cannot offer you an easy life," he said, holding her hands in his calloused ones. "The country is hard, and some people will not understand. But I can offer you truth, partnership, and love that will not diminish with seasons or hardship." She had said yes, not because she was unhappy with her Philadelphia life, but because she recognized in him something she had not known. She was seeking a chance to discover who she might become, in a place where horizons were measured in days of travel rather than city blocks. Their life in Frost Hollow had been challenging, but filled with unexpected joys. Matto found work as a scout and guide, his knowledge of the country making him valuable, despite suspicions some harbored about his mixed loyalties. Rosalie established herself as a baker again, selling bread and pastries to travelers hungry for the taste of civilization. May had been born in spring, a small but healthy baby, with her father's dark eyes and her mother's stubborn chin. For 6 months that their little family existed in a bubble of contentment that seemed proof against the larger troubles of the world. Then the spring floods came early, and Matto died guiding a freight train across a temporary trestle that collapsed beneath the weight. They found his body 3 days later, his scouting fee still in his pocket, along with a letter he had been writing to Rosalie about supplies needed for their cabin. The cholera that followed struck with merciless efficiency. May was among the first children to fall ill, the disease burning through her small body with terrible speed. Rosalie held her daughter through the final night, singing Irish lullabies, until May's breathing simply stopped, as gentle as a candle flame extinguished by wind. Decker's sheds had fouled the creek upstream. The contaminated waters spread the disease among settlers and camp alike. It was then that the Barrett family made their move, claiming debts that somehow could not be paid in cash, only through indenture that would effectively enslave her, while removing the inconvenient reminder of Matto's mixed marriage from their community. The bay horse stretched into a ground-eating gallop that carried them toward the prairie's edge, while pursuit thundered behind them. Rosalie's back pressed against Kitchy's chest as they rode, her cropped scalp vulnerable to wind that carried the acrid scent of gunpowder and forge smoke. They reached the Cottonwood Bend just as disaster struck. The bay's right front hoof found a concealed prairie dog hole, and for one heart-stopping moment, they teetered on the edge of a fall that would leave them afoot and helpless. Only Kitchy's expert horsemanship pulled them back from catastrophe, but the horse was now favoring its injured hoof. A rifle shot cracked across the prairie as Kitchy swung down to examine the injury. "Stone wedged deep," he said, already working with his knife to free it. "Give me 30 seconds. From behind them came the unexpected rattle of Dr. Whitcomb's medical wagon, moving at dangerous speed. "North Ford," she called, pointing toward a section of river showing signs of regular crossing. Water's shallower there. The ford proved treacherous despite her assurance. Spring runoff had swollen the stream, and the current ran swift and dark with sediment. Halfway across the bay, slipped on moss-covered stones, and nearly went down, recovered only through Kitchy's expert balance and Rosalie's instinctive lean into the turn. "Easy does it." Kitchy murmured, his left hand briefly covering hers where she gripped the saddle horn, steadying her as much as offering reassurance. Beyond the river lay broken country, a maze of draws and gullies that could provide concealment for those who knew how to use it. But they had traveled only a mile when new danger materialized from shadows ahead. A pack of 6 wolves emerged from concealment, drawn by the scent of poisoned buffalo bones scattered throughout the draw. Instead of reaching for his rifle, Kitchy tried a different approach. He snapped a dry branch and waved it overhead, while making sharp, aggressive sounds designed to convince the wolves they faced something more dangerous than the potential reward justified. "Off!" Rosalie shouted, adding her voice to his display. "Get back!" The confrontation balanced on a knife's edge before the lead wolf stepped backward, signaling the pack would seek easier quarry elsewhere. They melted back into shadows as silently as they had appeared. But the encounter had cost precious time. Behind them, pursuit sounds grew closer as their enemies picked up the trail. The scree slope ahead climbed toward a rocky ridge that would give them options. But the climb proved treacherous on loose stones, while the injured bay struggled for purchase. Halfway up, Rosalie's strength began to fail. The combination of shock exhaustion and physical trauma was taking its toll. Kitchi called a halt on a narrow ledge, helping her dismount as her knees buckled. From their elevated position, the full scope of their danger became clear. Below, at least 8 mounted men worked the trail with methodical precision. More ominously, a second group approached from the east, Silas Decker's men, drawn by reports of bounties on their heads. 14 men. Rosalie observed, her voice hoarse but steady. We can't outrun that many. Don't need to outrun them. Kitchi replied, studying terrain above. Just need to reach ground where running isn't the only choice. As if summoned by his words, wine brought them the scent of smoke from the distance. Orange light flickered along the southern horizon. Someone had started a grass fire. Fire spreads fast in this country, Kitchi observed calmly. But it might give us cover if we time it right. Night fell like a curtain as they found shelter in an abandoned line shack perched on a windswept ridge. The single-room structure had once housed railroad workers, but now stood empty and weathered, its tar paper roof patched with scavenged materials. The spring storm that arrived with prairie fury transformed scattered raindrops to driving downpours within minutes. Lightning cracked overhead like artillery fire, while thunder rolled endlessly across the vast landscape, and wind howled around the shack's corners with banshee intensity. Inside their meager shelter, Kitchi knelt by the stone fireplace, coaxing flames from tinder, dry enough to ignite at the mere suggestion of spark. The growing firelight revealed the careful economy of his movements, each action serving a specific purpose in their campaign for survival. "Let me tend those burns," he said, glancing toward her injured scalp. From his saddlebags, he produced clean cloth, dampening it before warming it near the flames. The gentleness with which he cleaned away dried blood and applied the compress spoke of experience with battlefield injuries. The relief was immediate and profound heat, drawing fire from skin that had felt like it was burning from within. "Why?" she asked suddenly. "Why did you help me back there?" He looked up from cleaning his rifle, dark eyes reflecting firelight as he considered the question. "Your husband was a good man," he said finally. "We worked together on freight runs through dangerous country. He spoke of you and your daughter with the voice men use when they talk about things that make life worth living." Outside voices carried through the rain, searchers still hunting despite the storm, their lanterns creating moving points of light as they combed the broken country for signs of their quarry. "There's something else you need to see," Kitchi said, reaching into his saddlebags to produce a leather-wrapped bundle. "Something I took from Decker's operation before this started." He unwrapped the bundle to reveal a ledger book filled with columns of figures and dates. Even by firelight, Rosalie could see it was comprehensive documentation, the kind of meticulous record that careful criminals maintain to track profits and activities. Hide sales, meat shipments, bribery payments. Kitchi explained, opening the book to show pages covered with entries. All of it illegal poaching on reservation land, selling diseased meat to government buyers, bribing inspectors to approve tainted shipments. Rosalie studied the pages with an accountant's eye for detail. One set of entries caught her attention, marked with triangular symbols and describing meat sales labeled as culled for disease prevention. The dates corresponded exactly with the weeks before cholera struck Frost Hollow. They were selling poisoned buffalo meat. She breathed understanding, dawning with horrible clarity. Meat that should have been destroyed, they sold it to the government instead. And when people started dying, they needed someone to blame, Kitchi added. Your marriage to Maddo made you a convenient target. The ledger represented proof of deliberate mass poisoning for profit, a conspiracy that had killed her daughter and dozens of other innocent people. The casual evil of it left her speechless with rage. As she drifted toward sleep, wrapped in Kitchi's blanket, With the ledger clutched against her chest, her last conscious thought was of the steady rhythm of his breathing. Across the small room, a sound that had somehow become as essential to her sense of security as the walls sheltering them from the storm. Dawn brought deceptive peace morning light, revealing a landscape washed clean by night's rain. But the peaceful appearance was illusory, as new dangers converged on their position with the inevitability of a closing trap. Jonah Pike appeared on the horizon, leading a pack mule, his arrival initially hopeful, until his expression revealed troubles beyond their immediate predicament. He dismounted with the weary movements of a man who had ridden hard through a sleepless night. "They got me," he said without preamble. "Harlan arrested me for aiding fugitives, held me overnight, while his deputies tore my place apart." The news struck them like physical blows. Jonah had been their most reliable ally, and his arrest eliminated crucial support while demonstrating their pursuers' escalation beyond simple manhunting. "How did you escape?" Kitchie asked. "Dr. Whitcomb posted bail," Jonah replied with bitter humor. "Convinced the territorial commissioner that holding folks without charges was bad for the territory's reputation. But it won't last. Harlan's working on sworn complaints from the Barretts." From his pack, Jonah produced supplies and a hand-drawn map showing back trails connecting the region's scattered settlements. But he also carried darker intelligence about the conspiracy they faced. "Decker's called in every marker he's owed," Jonah reported. "Half the territorial legislatures got money in his operation. And Judge Kellum's circuit has been delayed indefinitely, some legal challenge that'll tie him up for months." The information eliminated their best hope for legitimate resolution. But Jonah offered an alternative gleaned from his network among honest ranchers and small farmers. "There's a hide processing shed by the old trestle," he explained, indicating a location on his map. "Decker uses it for storing meat before rail shipment. Word is he keeps master records there, documentation that shows the full scope of his criminal enterprise." "Too dangerous," Kitchie said immediately. "That's the heart of his territory." "Maybe so," Jonah acknowledged. "But it's also where you'll find evidence that even territorial politicians couldn't ignore. Bills of lading shipping records, correspondence with federal buyers, proof of conspiracy at the highest levels." Their planning was interrupted by discovery that the mine road had washed out during the night's deluge. Worse still, Rosalie's injured knee had stiffened until she could barely put weight on it, the joint swollen to twice its normal size. "I'm slowing you down," she stated with characteristic directness. "You could move faster alone." "We stay together," Kitchie replied without hesitation. Working together, they fashioned a crude but functional splint using materials from Jonah's supplies. Kitchie's hands were gentle but efficient as he bound the joint, creating support that would allow her to ride despite significant pain. The medical care created moments of connection that transcended practical necessity. When Rosalie gripped his wrist to steady herself during the painful splinting process, their eyes met with understanding that bypassed need for words. "Tell me about before," she said quietly as he finished securing the bindings. "Before you were Silent Rain." He was silent for so long, she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, still focused on his work, he began to speak in a voice barely above a whisper. "I had a different name then. Lakota, meaning friend to all. My band called me that because I could make peace between arguing hunters, settle disputes over hunting grounds." His hands stilled on the bandages. "When the buffalo poachers came, they killed my cousin, a boy of 12 winters who was learning to track. The council demanded I lead a war party to take revenge. But you refused. The poacher they wanted dead was just a boy himself, maybe 16. White scared, probably didn't even fire the shot that killed Wikapi. But he was there, so he had to pay with blood. Kitchy's voice carried old pain. I said no. Said killing children would make us no better than those who killed ours. Rosalie reached out, covering his hands with hers. That took courage. The council called it cowardice. Said I valued white lives over Lakota blood. They were not entirely wrong. I'd lived in both worlds too long to see them as simply us and them. He looked up, meeting her eyes. So they gave me a new name. Silent Rain, beautiful to look at, but bringing no nourishment to the people. And that's when you took the ledger. The poacher's boss was Silas Decker. I decided if I couldn't stop him with war, maybe I could stop him with his own words. His smile was grim. Seemed fitting that a man who dealt in poison should be brought down by paper and ink. The intimacy of the confession settled between them like warmth from the dying fire. Rosalie found herself studying his profile in the morning light, noting the concentration with which he approached even simple tasks, the way competence seemed to radiate from him like heat from forge coals. "What about you?" he asked. What was Rosalie Quinn like before she became Rosalie Red Willow? She was quiet for a moment, thinking of the woman she had been in Philadelphia, cautious, methodical content, with small pleasures and predictable routines. Smaller, she said finally. I thought in terms of daily bread, weekly profits, seasonal changes, and what people wanted to buy. The biggest risk I ever took was trying a new recipe for holiday cakes. What changed? Motto. The name came easily now, without the sharp stab of pain that had once accompanied it. He made me see that safety isn't the same as living. That sometimes you have to risk everything you have to become who you're meant to be. Kitchy nodded, understanding, passing between them without need for further words. They were both people who had been forced to remake themselves, to find new identities when their old ones no longer fit the world they inhabited. As they prepared for the most dangerous phase of their journey, Rosalie found herself thinking not about the perils ahead, but about the man who had become her partner in this desperate enterprise. The bond growing between them was built on more than shared danger. It was founded on mutual recognition of each other's courage, intelligence, and refusal to surrender in the face of overwhelming odds. Ready? Kitchy asked, helping her into the saddle with careful attention to her splinted knee. With you, always, she replied, surprised by the certainty in her own voice. They rode out toward whatever fate awaited at the trestle, two figures against the vast landscape, but no longer feeling quite so alone in their struggle against forces that would have crushed them individually. Together, they had discovered something that might be strong enough to survive even the trials ahead. The hide shed crouched beside the river trestle like an enormous, malignant growth, its walls blackened with blood and grease from countless butchering operations. Even from several hundred yards away, the stench was overwhelming, a noxious combination of rotting meat, curing chemicals, and decay that seemed to cling to everything like invisible fog. Kitchy and Rosalie lay prone atop a low rise, studying the facility through Jonah's small spyglass. The shed was larger than expected, perhaps 80 feet long, and half as wide, constructed of rough lumber, weathered to bone gray. A substantial loading dock extended into the river, where flatboats could tie up to receive cargo bound for downstream markets. 3 guards visible, Kitchy murmured, adjusting the spyglass's focus. One by the main entrance, another patrolling the perimeter, third on the dock checking shipments, all armed with rifles. They spent the afternoon observing guard routines and identifying potential approaches. The surrounding terrain was frustratingly open, providing little natural cover except scattered boulders and the creek bed that paralleled the river. As evening approached, they developed their plan. Rosalie would create a distraction by igniting hay stacked near the loading dock, drawing guards' attention while Kitchy gained entry through a window on the shed's riverside. I should be the one going inside. Rosalie argued as they prepared for the attempt. I know what to look for in business records, how to spot the documents that matter most. Too dangerous, Kitchi replied. If something goes wrong, we both die anyway, she interrupted. But if we succeed, I can find what we need faster than you can. I've been keeping books since I was 14 years old. The logic was undeniable, though it meant reversing their carefully planned roles. As full darkness settled over the river valley, they began their approach using the creek bed for concealment. The water proved deeper than anticipated, reaching Rosalie's waist in places. Her injured knees screamed with every step, but she suppressed any sounds that might alert guards to their presence. They reached the building's shadow, just as first raindrops began falling. From his pack, Kitchi produced lamp oil that Rosalie used to soak handfuls of hay, while he positioned himself to boost her through the window. Be careful, he said, his hands lingering at her waist as he prepared to lift her. In the darkness, she could feel the tension in his body, the reluctance to let her take the greater risk. I will, she promised, and then surprised them both by pressing a quick kiss to his cheek. For luck. The moment their lips touched, everything seemed to still around them. The distant sounds of guards, of the approaching storm, even her own thundering heartbeat, all of it faded into background as something fundamental shifted between them. When they separated, both knew that whatever happened in the next hour would either bind them together forever or destroy them both. Timing had to be perfect. Too early, and guards would organize proper response. Too late, and Rosalie might be trapped inside with no escape route. They synchronized movements using hand signals, counting down seconds until the distraction would commence. Kitchi struck a match and touched it to oil-soaked hay. Flames caught immediately, sending up a column of bright orange light. Shouts erupted from inside the shed as guards responded to the emergency boots pounding across wooden floors. In the same instant, he boosted Rosalie through the window, and she disappeared into the structure's interior. The fire burned more fiercely than anticipated, spreading from hay to wooden dock planks within minutes. Inside the shed, Rosalie worked by firelight, filtering through windows, searching stacks of paperwork with focused intensity. Her baker's training in inventory management served her well as she rapidly sorted through documents, identifying the most significant records. A folder marked Federal Contracts contained devastating evidence, invoice copies for meat delivered to military posts and Indian agencies' meat that ledgers clearly identified as culled from diseased herds. But even more damaging were letters from territorial officials acknowledging receipt of bribes for favorable inspection reports. As she stuffed the most incriminating documents inside her shirt, the shed's main door burst open and additional men poured in with buckets and shovels. The building now swarmed with people trying to prevent the fire's spread to valuable contents. At the window, Kitchi watched with growing alarm. Too many people were now involved for their original escape plan to work. But even as he considered alternatives, one of the guards discovered footprints in mud near the creek prints, clearly showing movement toward the shed rather than away from it. The discovery would inevitably lead to a building search. Acting on instinct, Kitchi stepped from concealment and walked directly toward the burning dock, drawing attention to himself, while Rosalie sought another exit. Looking for me? He called his rifle ready as faces turned toward his voice. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Shouts erupted from every direction as men recognized him as the fugitive they'd been hunting. Rifles swung toward his position, while voices demanded surrender. Inside the shed, Rosalie heard the commotion and knew Kitchi was buying her time with his own life. She found a second window on the structure's far side, but it was 8 feet above the ground, with no easy way down. Taking a deep breath, she swung her legs through the opening and dropped, landing hard on her injured knee. Pain shot through her leg like liquid fire. But she forced herself to move, crawling toward the riverbank, while gunfire erupted behind her. The current was swift and cold when she slipped into the water, but it carried her downstream toward a bend where she could rejoin Kitchi if he managed to escape the trap he'd created for himself. From her hiding place among the reeds, she watched him work his way backward from the burning dock, using smoke and shadows for concealment, while returning disciplined fire that kept his attackers cautious. But he was outnumbered 10-1, and his ammunition wouldn't last forever. That was when the second fire started. Whether by accident or design, flames had spread to a stack of processed hides soaked in flammable chemicals. The resulting explosion sent a pillar of fire into the night sky that could be seen for miles. But more importantly, it created chaos that allowed Kitchi to slip away in the confusion. They reunited at the bend, both soaked and exhausted, but alive. The documents Rosalie had stolen crackled against her ribs as Kitchi helped her from the water. His relief at finding her safe, evident in the way his hands trembled slightly as he checked her for injuries. "Did you get what we needed?" he asked. Instead of answering with words, she pressed the stolen papers into his hands. "Everything," she said. "Enough to hang Decker and half the territorial government." As they made their way to where their horse waited, the burning shed behind them sent smoke signals into the storm clouds gathering overhead. They had the evidence, but now came the harder task, surviving long enough to present it to someone with the authority to act. The real test of their mission was only beginning. The abandoned Ghost Lantern mine offered sanctuary as the storm broke with prairie fury, but their refuge proved temporary. By dawn, voices echoed from the mine entrance, as searchers who had followed their trail despite the storm's interference closed in on their position. Moving deeper into the mountain through absolute darkness, they found a ventilation shaft that brought them out above the main entrance, just as their pursuers discovered the horse was gone, either stolen or frightened away by the chaos at the shed. Now afoot in hostile country, they faced a new challenge that tested both their endurance and their growing partnership. The nearest safe haven was Fletcher Pike's Way Station, but reaching it required crossing 15 miles of open prairie, where mounted pursuers would have every advantage. "We move at night," Kitchi decided as they watched their enemies organize search parties below. "Follow the creek beds and dry washes stay off the skylines." "My knee won't hold up to that much walking," Rosalie admitted, hating to voice the limitation, but knowing he needed to plan around it. "Then we make sure it doesn't have to." His response was immediate, confident. "I know this country. There are places we can wrest ways to move that don't require covering distance on foot." What followed was a masterclass in frontier survival, as Kitchi drew on skills learned in childhood to keep them ahead of their pursuers. He found a travois, hidden near an old campsite, 2 poles and a buffalo hide, that allowed him to pull her across difficult terrain when her injury flared. When they needed to cross open ground, he waited for cloud cover that would mask their movement from distant observers. But it was Rosalie's contribution that proved equally valuable. Her experience managing complex supply lines and wagon routes had taught her to think systematically about resources and logistics skills that translated surprisingly well to their current predicament. "There," she said during their second night, pointing to marks on Jonah's map. "That symbol means water, but look at the elevation lines. It's not just a spring, it's high enough to give us a view of the approaches defensible if they corner us there." Her analysis proved correct. The spring occupied a natural fortress of tumbled boulders that provided both concealment and clear sight lines in all directions. More importantly, the water was clean and cold, allowing them to refill their bottles and tend their injuries properly. It was there, hidden among the rocks, while rain pelted down around them, that their relationship crossed another threshold. Exhaustion and shared danger had stripped away the polite barriers that normally governed interactions between unmarried men and women, leaving them with a raw honesty that might have shocked them under other circumstances. "I'm scared," Rosalie admitted as she rebandaged her knee by lamplight. "Not of dying, I've been ready for that since May passed. But of failing, of letting their deaths mean nothing." "They won't mean nothing," Kitchi replied, moving closer to help with the bandage. His hands were steady and sure as he worked, but she could feel the tension in him like a coiled spring. "We have the evidence. We have witnesses. Justice is possible." "Is it? Or are we just telling ourselves that because the alternative is too terrible to face?" He was quiet for a long moment, considering her question, with the seriousness it deserved. "I don't know," he said finally. "But I know that giving up guarantees they win. Fighting gives us a chance, even if it's a small one." She studied his profile in the lamplight, noting the way shadows emphasized the strong line of his jaw, the determination in his dark eyes. "Why does it matter so much to you? It's not your fight, not really." "It became my fight the moment I saw you kneeling in that street," he replied without hesitation. "And it's not just about you or May or even Maddo. It's about whether there's still room in this country for people who refuse to be victims." The words hung between them, weighted with meaning that went beyond their immediate circumstances. In the space of a few days, they had become more than allies of convenience. They had become partners in the deepest sense, bound together by shared values and mutual trust that transcended the differences in their backgrounds. When she leaned forward and kissed him properly this time, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. His response was immediate and tender, his arms coming around her with a gentleness that spoke of deep feeling carefully controlled. "I'm not made for gentle treatment," she warned when they separated, her voice husky with emotion. "Good," he replied, his thumb tracing the line of her cheek. "Neither am I." They held each other close as rain drummed on the rocks above them, finding in each other's warmth a comfort that neither had expected to discover again. It was not the desperate passion of people who might die tomorrow, but something deeper and more enduring, the recognition of two souls that had found their match despite impossible circumstances. When morning came, they resumed their journey with renewed determination, but also with something that had been missing before, the absolute certainty that whatever lay ahead, they would face it together. Not just as allies, but as partners in every sense that mattered. Fletcher Pike's way station appeared at midday, on their third day of travel, smoke rising from its chimney, like a beacon of hope in the vast landscape. But even as they approached the buildings, Rosalie felt a nagging unease that she couldn't quite identify. The old man who greeted them seemed genuinely glad to see them arrive, safely offering food, rest, and fresh horses for the final leg of their journey to Millfield. But something in his manner suggested complications they hadn't anticipated. "There's been developments," Fletcher said as they sat around his table sharing a meal of venison stew. "Words reached me that Federal Marshal Morrison is indeed in Millfield, but so are a lot of other folks. Deckers called in favors from every corner of the territory." The news was both encouraging and ominous. Morrison represented their best hope of finding someone with the authority and integrity to act on their evidence. But reaching him would be more dangerous than they had anticipated. "There's something else," Fletcher continued, his weathered face grave. "My sources tell me that Deputy Harlan Pike has been asking a lot of questions about his brother's activities. Might be he's having second thoughts about which side he wants to be on when this all shakes out." The possibility that Jonah's brother might switch sides added another variable to an already complex situation. But it also represented potential opportunity if they could find a way to exploit the family tensions that were clearly developing. As they prepared for the final push to Millfield, Fletcher pulled Kitchi aside for a private conversation that Rosalie couldn't overhear. When they returned, Both men wore expressions that suggested their discussion had covered troubling ground. "What did he tell you?" she asked as they mounted the fresh horses Fletcher had provided. "That we're riding into a trap," Kitchie replied grimly. "But also that it might be a trap we can turn to our advantage if we're smart about how we spring it." The road to Millfield stretched before them, promising either vindication or destruction. But they rode toward it with the confidence of people who had already survived more than most would have thought possible, and who had found in each other something worth fighting for, regardless of the odds. Behind them, Fletcher watched from his doorway until they disappeared over the horizon, and then turned back inside to send his own messages through the network of connections that would ensure their arrival in Millfield would not go unnoticed by either friends or enemies. The final confrontation was approaching, and all the major players were converging on a single point, where the fate of justice in the territory would be decided by courage, cunning, and the bonds between people who refused to surrender to those who would corrupt everything they touched. Millfield sprawled along the railroad tracks, like a collection of children's blocks, its single main street flanked by false-fronted buildings that gave the settlement a more substantial appearance than its actual population warranted. But the federal marshal who met them at the depot was exactly what they needed to see: a small, compact man whose eyes held the cold intelligence of someone accustomed to surviving dangerous professions through superior cunning rather than superior firepower. Jake Morrison stood barely 5.5 feet tall, but the twin Colt revolvers at his hips were worn with the casual confidence of long practice, and his deputies positioned around the platform moved with the coordinated efficiency of men who had worked together through previous crises. "You're Fletcher's messengers," he said without preamble, his voice carrying the flat accent of the northern plains. "Got somewhere private we can conduct business." The somewhere proved to be a cramped office above the town's bank, borrowed from a manager who owed Morrison favors. The room smelled of ink and old ledgers, its single window overlooking the main street, where life continued with the determined normalcy of a community trying to ignore the storm gathering around it. Morrison examined their stolen documents with the methodical attention of someone building a legal case from fragmentary evidence. His questions were precise and detailed, probing for gaps that might undermine their credibility in formal proceedings. "This is exceptional work," he said finally, setting the papers aside. "Comprehensive, well-documented, absolutely damning. It's also going to make important people extremely upset, very quickly." His warning proved prophetic within hours. Word of their presence had somehow leaked despite precautions, and by evening Millfield swarmed with armed men whose loyalties clearly lay with the interests they had come to expose. But Morrison was not a man who intimidated easily. "Let them come," he said as they watched riders patrol the streets below. "I've got federal authority, federal backing, and federal troops on the way from Fort Laramie. Decker can bring all the hired guns he wants. This ends in a courtroom, not a shootout." The siege that developed over the following days tested everyone's resolve in ways that simple pursuit had not. Rather than attempting direct assault, Decker's supporters chose to wait them out, controlling access to supplies while building legal challenges to Morrison's jurisdiction. It was on the third day that the trap was finally sprung. Rosalie was returning from a carefully escorted trip to the general store when she noticed the unusual quiet that had settled over the main street. Too many people had found reasons to be elsewhere, and those who remained watched her with the nervous attention of spectators waiting for violence to begin. She was perhaps 50 yards from the bank when Deputy Harlan Pike stepped out of an alley, his badge catching the afternoon sunlight, but his rifle pointed directly at her chest. "That's far enough, Mrs. Red Willow," he said, his voice carrying across the suddenly empty street. "You've caused enough trouble for one lifetime." From windows and doorways, more armed men appeared, not just Decker's hired guns, but respected citizens whose investments in the criminal enterprise had been threatened by her evidence. The trap was comprehensive, professionally executed, and seemingly inescapable. But Rosalie had not survived the past week by accepting impossible situations as final. Her mind, trained by years of managing complex business problems, automatically began calculating angles and possibilities, even as terror threatened to freeze her in place. Harlan, she called deliberately, using his first name to emphasize their shared humanity. You know this is wrong. You know what they did to your town, to your people. What I know, he replied. But there was uncertainty in his voice that hadn't been there moments before. Is that you've been nothing but trouble since you arrived. Maybe if you'd stayed where you belonged, none of this would have happened. My 6-month-old daughter is dead because of the meat they sold. Rosalie continued, taking a careful step forward. May never hurt anyone, never did anything but try to learn to walk and say her first words. Are you really going to help the men who killed her? From the bank window above, she could see Morrison's face, could see him calculating odds and preparing to act. But she also saw something else. Kitchy moving along the rooftops with a silent precision that had earned him his name, positioning himself for whatever opportunity might present itself. That was when the unexpected happened. Jonah Pike emerged from the crowd that had gathered to watch the confrontation, his weathered face set with grim determination. He walked directly to his brother's side, and for a moment, Rosalie thought their situation had become hopeless. But instead of supporting Harlan, Jonah reached out and gently pushed the rifle barrel toward the ground. No, he said simply. Not like this. Not for them. The confrontation that followed between the Pike brothers played out in voices too low for most spectators to hear, but the intensity of their exchange was visible to everyone present. Finally, Harlan's shoulders sagged in defeat, and he lowered his weapon completely. I'm sorry, he said loud enough for the entire street to hear. I was wrong. They offered me money, and I was weak enough to consider it. But this isn't justice. It's just revenge dressed up in legal clothes. The admission shattered the carefully orchestrated trap like a stone through glass. Other participants began backing away, suddenly reluctant to be associated with an enterprise that even the deputy sheriff had abandoned. In the space of minutes, the overwhelming force arrayed against them melted away like snow in spring sunshine. But Silas Decker was not a man who accepted defeat gracefully. If you won't finish this, he snarled, emerging from the crowd with a pistol in each hand, then I damn well will. What followed unfolded with the terrifying speed of frontier violence unleashed. Decker's first shot shattered the window of the general store as Rosalie dove for cover behind a water trough. His second shot went wide as Kitchy's rifle cracked from the rooftop the .44 caliber bullet, taking Decker in the shoulder and spinning him around. But wounded and desperate men are often the most dangerous. Decker steadied himself against a hitching post and raised his remaining pistol, taking careful aim at Rosalie's position with the patience of a man who had nothing left to lose. The shot that ended the confrontation came not from Kitchy's rifle, but from Morrison's Colt as the federal marshal stepped onto the street with the calm authority of a man enforcing federal law. Decker crumpled to the dust, his criminal enterprise dying with him in the space between heartbeats. In the sudden silence that followed, Rosalie emerged from cover to find herself surrounded by people she had begun to think of as allies. Morrison, with his smoking pistol, Jonah, and even Harlan Pike standing together despite their differences, and Kitchy dropping down from the rooftop with the fluid grace that made difficult things look effortless. It's over, Morrison said, holstering his weapon with practiced efficiency. The evidence stands. The criminals are defeated or dead, and justice has been served. But even as relief flooded through her, Rosalie found herself thinking not about the victory they had achieved, but about the cost that had been paid to reach this moment. May and Maddo were still gone, and no amount of justice could bring them back or fill the hollow places they had left behind. It was Kitchi who understood her thoughts without need for explanation. He came to her side and took her hand, his touch gentle but sure, offering not false comfort, but genuine partnership in whatever came next. "We did it," he said simply. "We made their deaths mean something." She nodded, unable to speak, past the emotions that threatened to overwhelm her. They had indeed done what they set out to do, exposed the corruption, brought the criminals to justice, and ensured that other families would not suffer as theirs had. But more than that, and they had found in each other something neither had expected to discover again, or the possibility of love, built not on romantic fantasy, but on proven trust, shared values, and the kind of partnership that could survive anything the world might throw at them. The legal proceedings that followed unfolded with surprising speed once federal authority had been properly established. Territorial officials implicated in the correspondence faced suspension and federal investigation, while surviving members of Decker's organization were arrested on charges ranging from conspiracy to criminal negligence, resulting in multiple deaths. The Barrett family's carefully constructed facade of respectability crumbled completely when confronted with documented evidence of their role in the conspiracy. Thomas Barrett and his sons were led away in shackles, their property seized to compensate victims of their crimes. Most satisfying to Rosalie was the voiding of the indenture papers that would have enslaved her and the court order returning property seized after Maddo's death. But material compensation, however welcome, could not address the deeper wounds that required healing through time and care. It was Dr. Ada Whitcomb who provided the medical attention Rosalie needed for her injuries. But more importantly, she offered something else: a partnership in establishing a medical supplies service for isolated communities throughout the territory. "You understand logistics and record-keeping," the doctor explained as they discussed the proposal. "I understand medicine and the needs of frontier settlements. Together, we could ensure that proper medical supplies reach places where they're desperately needed." The proposal appealed to Rosalie for reasons that went beyond simple business opportunity. It would allow her to honor May's memory by working to prevent other children from dying of preventable diseases, while also providing the structure she needed to rebuild her life in meaningful ways. Kitchi faced his own choices about the future. A delegation from his Oglala band had arrived in Millfield with an offer to restore his standing in recognition of his role in exposing the corruption that had harmed both white and Native communities. "The council has reconsidered your actions," the delegation leader explained. "They now understand that sometimes the greatest courage lies in refusing to follow paths that lead only to more blood and suffering." But Kitchi's response surprised everyone, including himself. "I'm honored by the offer," he said carefully. "But I've found something here that I'm not ready to give up. If the council would accept it, I'd like to serve as a bridge between our peoples, helping to prevent the kind of misunderstandings that lead to conflict." The role he envisioned was unprecedented, but desperately needed someone who could move between white and Native communities, facilitating communication and trade relationships based on mutual respect rather than suspicion and fear. It was a position that would require him to remain in Millfield at least part of the time. And if Rosalie's own plans kept her in the same area, well, that was simply a fortunate coincidence that served everyone's interests. Their wedding took place 6 months later, exactly 1 year after Kitchi had first stepped between Rosalie and the Barrett family's branding iron. The ceremony was performed by federal Judge Harrison, who had arrived to oversee the final resolution of the corruption cases. Dr. Whitcomb served as matron of honor, while Jonah Pike stood as best man in a gesture that symbolized the healing of old divisions. Even Harlan Pike attended his presence, a reminder that redemption was possible for those willing to acknowledge their mistakes and work to correct them. The reception was held in Millfield's community hall with food provided by families from across the territory who had benefited from the exposure of Decker's criminal enterprise. It was not an elaborate affair by city standards, but it represented something more valuable, the celebration of a community that had learned to stand together against corruption and injustice. As they danced to music provided by a traveling fiddler, Rosalie found herself thinking about the journey that had brought them to this point. The woman who had once knelt in Frost Hollow's dusty street, spirit nearly broken, had become someone capable of fighting corruption and building new institutions. The warrior who had lived in exile had found a way to serve both his heritage and his adopted community. "No regrets?" Kitchi asked as they swayed together to the gentle melody. "Only that May and Maddo can't be here to see this," she replied honestly. "But I think they would approve of what we've built together." "I know they would," he said, his arms tightening around her. "We've honored their memory by refusing to let their deaths be meaningless." 3 years later, their combined enterprises had grown into the largest freight and medical supply operation in the territory. Rosalie's skills with logistics and Kitchi's knowledge of the country had proven to be a formidable combination, allowing them to establish reliable supply lines to communities that had previously been cut off from essential goods and services. But their success was measured in more than financial terms. The network of relationships they had built served as a foundation for broader changes in how different communities interacted with each other. Trade partnerships based on mutual benefit gradually replaced the suspicion and hostility that had previously characterized relations between white settlements and native bands. Dr. Whitcomb's, a circuit-riding physician with a traveling infirmary chest supplied through their freight runs and wagon schedules, had reduced infant mortality rates throughout the region by more than half. The clean water systems they had helped establish in dozens of communities had virtually eliminated cholera and other waterborne diseases. It was satisfying work that honored the memory of those they had lost while building something positive for the future. But the real measure of their success remained personal. They had found in each other the kind of partnership that made difficult challenges manageable and good times even better. The letter that arrived on a Tuesday morning in late fall brought news that completed their story's circle in ways neither had anticipated. It came from the Frost Hollow Town Council, informing them that an anonymous benefactor had commissioned a memorial garden around the cemetery where May and Maddo were buried. Standing together beside the completed memorial on a bright October morning, they read the inscription that would preserve for future generations the truth they had fought to establish. In memory of those whose lives were cut short not by natural disaster, but by the greed of men who valued profit above human decency. Their sacrifice ensured that such tragedies would not befall others. They did not die in vain. Individual names were listed below: May Quinn Red Willow, aged 6 months; Samuel Henderson, age 43; Mary Catherine O'Brien, age 28, and dozens more, each representing a life lost to preventable disease spread by criminal negligence. The memorial garden itself was a testament to renewal and hope. Native prairie grasses had been replanted around the graves, and wildflower seeds scattered to create blooms that would return each spring. A small stream had been redirected to flow through the space, its clean water a deliberate reminder that proper stewardship could restore what criminal negligence had poisoned. They didn't die for nothing. Rosalie said, her voice steady despite tears as she knelt to place wildflowers at May's marker. No. Kitchi agreed, his hand resting on her shoulder. They made all of this possible. The justice, the changes, the lives we've been able to save, none of it would have happened without their sacrifice. As they walked back toward town together, the late afternoon sun cast their shadows long across prairie grass that rustled in wind, carrying the promise of approaching winter. Behind them, the memorial garden caught golden light that made the carved names seem to glow with inner fire, a beacon of remembrance that would endure long after those who created it were themselves just names on stone, at the edge of Frost Hollow, where their wagon waited to carry them home. Rosalie paused for one final look at the memorial. The inscription was clearly visible from this distance, its message as permanent as human hands could make it. Truth had survived determined efforts to bury it, and justice, however delayed, remained possible for those with courage to pursue it. "Ready to go home?" Kitchi asked, offering his hand to help her into the wagon. She took his hand, their fingers intertwining with the natural ease of partnership tested by fire and proven stronger than either had dared hope. "Always ready," she replied, "as long as we're going together." The road stretched before them, leading back to warehouse and office, to ledgers and supply schedules, to the ordinary challenges and extraordinary satisfactions of the life they had chosen to build. It was not the dramatic existence celebrated in novels or the safe predictability recommended by conventional society, but it was theirs earned through courage and sustained by commitment to each other and the principles that had brought them together. Behind them, wine-stirred grass around graves, where May and Maddow rested in earth, finally purified of the poison that had taken them. Ahead lay home partnership, and the quiet satisfaction of accounts balanced between loss and justice, between grief and hope, between the past that had shaped them and the future they continued to create with their own hands. The sun set as they reached Millfield, painting the western sky in shades of gold and crimson that promised fair weather for tomorrow's journey. And in the growing dusk, lights began appearing in windows throughout the town, each one representing lives that continued because two people had refused to accept that justice was impossible, even in a world that seemed designed to crush such stubborn hope. They had built something together that neither could have achieved alone, not just a business or even a marriage, but a legacy of courage and integrity that would outlast their own lives. In a territory where might had once made right and the powerful preyed upon the weak with impunity, they had proven that ordinary people could make extraordinary differences when they refused to surrender to injustice. May and Maddow were gone, and no victory could bring them back. But their deaths had not been meaningless. They had sparked a transformation that protected countless other families from similar tragedies. In the end, that was perhaps the best monument anyone could hope for. Lives saved, justice served, and love proven stronger than the forces that sought to destroy it. As Kitchi helped Rosalie down from the wagon in front of their home, she found herself thinking not about the battles they had fought, but about the peace they had won. Not just for themselves, but for everyone whose lives had been made safer by their refusal to accept that corruption was simply the price of progress. "Thank you," she said quietly as they stood together in the doorway of the life they had built. "For what?" "For seeing something worth saving when I couldn't see it myself. For refusing to let them win. For becoming my partner in every way that matters." He kissed her, then gentle and sure, and in that kiss was everything they had learned about love and lost courage and justice, and the infinite possibility that opened when two people decided to face the world together.